Hi, everybody. Mike and Peter, we are back again. Mike is a lawyer and I'm a therapist, and we pick up things that are either in the news or that we think are newsworthy and worth a debate and a discussion. And something we both picked up recently was an American big law firm called Paul Hastings. They have made themselves hit the news for the wrong reasons, a lot of people thought, about behaviors. And now they're in the news again, mainly in American Law magazine, about their way of recruiting and how that has an impact on the rest of the business. And some 22 people from marketing and sales have left as a result of hiring a whole raft of new lawyers. And there's a bit of management stuff going on as well about micromanagement. So how can we roll all this into one conversation, Mike? Because it's about culture, isn't it? What do we want? How do we want it? How do we get it?
Yeah, it's a word I always come back to, but reinforced that it's a word that's really relevant. And yeah, so Paul Hastings has been in the news first. We talked about it earlier, but they were in the news because of that viral PowerPoint slide, about being always on and kind of the culture. There's a lot of discussion around that. And, that could have been Paul Hastings or any other, big law firm, really, to be fair. And then, yeah, there was this article in American Lawyer really about how so many of the support staff, the marketing folks, the BD people, the people around the lawyers that help us be successful were leaving. And some of the comments I thought were interesting because it comes back to culture. But I think, they've hired, a lot of law firms grow by hiring laterals, people from other law firms. And I think one, that does put, if you do that a lot, it does put a strain on the business. You have to figure out how to still have people do their jobs, but also, it can introduce lots of, other styles and people. And it seems like from some of the comments in that article, it was a little bit of both, but it included a clash of sort of styles, bringing in 60 new partners and 60 partners leaving, in the span of a couple of years. That's a lot of change. And so, of course, that trickles down, or not trickles, it hits immediately, the people that you work with and the culture. And so some of those comments, I think, to me, just really underscored that it's important for businesses, including law firms, to not only be thoughtful about it, but to figure out, how to do this when there are so many stakeholders involved.
Absolutely. And there's so much written and talked about team building and team management. And I think we often forget that a team is not just a group of people with the same objective, and that's just who they are. People come and people go, and every time somebody new enters the team or somebody leaves the team, the dynamic change, don't they? You then have to get used to a new situation, and if it's a new person coming in from a different background, from a different culture, then what's going on and who is the team? As the article talked about, they never got a chance to train these people up to how we do things here. So I can imagine a lot of conflict could have happened. I've certainly experienced just one person entering my team, and it was very disruptive. Not because the person was disruptive, but because we all had to then start again from scratch and figure out who are we, what do we do, and how do we get this person integrated.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not only about training, but even more so about vetting. I think it really speaks to the issue of, well, what do you look at when you're growing your business and bringing in, new folks? And I think anyone who's ever been hired from one law firm to another, knows that essentially people look at, of course, do they like you and are you a good lawyer? But they look at your billable hours, they look at your book of business. And I think what this speaks to is you also have to look at the type of person that it is and how that person fits into, who you are. And I think that's what I see ripples of in this article. Because I think, I've spoken to people, if you're at any law firm, that law firm is going to say, this is our culture, right? This is what defines us. And it is different. I know it's a very fuzzy word, and everyone likes to say they have a great culture. But at heart, what type of place it is, how people treat each other, when management reinforces it, it does have a culture. So when you have a certain organic culture for people who are born and raised in a law firm, and then you have 60 new people, and if all you're looking at is the size of their book of business and their billable hours, and you're not also assessing this, I understand fuzzier and more subjective thing, but I would say really important thing, then you're going to get results like this. You're going to get fallout like this.
There's an old saying that we hire people for their technical ability and we fire them for their personality. and and if you don't look into seeing if there's a cultural, if not necessarily fit, but certainly can this person add value to our culture, then you're onto a loser straight away, aren't you? Because nobody wants to be transformed into being somebody who they're not. And if all you can see in front of you is dollar signs or whatever currency signs and a really sharp legal mind, and forget about how does all of that fit into who we are and who everybody else is, then you may not get the best from that superstar that you've just hired.
Yeah, and also not only that, but that superstar that you just hired may be affecting other people and other superstars that you have. And if it's making those people leave, then that's a negative that has to be accounted for in the overall value proposition. And I think I get it. It's very hard when you're interviewing someone, and they say, tell me about you. And you say, tell me about yourself. No one says, well, I yell at people and I increase the overall stress, but I have a great book of business. Nobody says that. It requires vetting. It requires talking to people, but it also, and so I think, of course, it's easier to look at two numbers and have a few surfacey conversations with someone, and look at kind of fit, like we're looking to grow our bankruptcy practice and this person's a bankruptcy lawyer. But I think we have to get more comfortable and build into our processes ways to do this evaluation, because I think it ends up being really important. Because if you bring in someone to grow your bankruptcy process and they don't fit and 5 people leave because they don't like working with that person and there's churn, that has a negative effect, not only on the culture but on the business.
So are we saying, Mike, that we're not very good at recruiting?
I think we're not very good at looking at several things that are really important to look at and that affect the bottom line. And that I think, what I take from this article is that, especially at high levels, it pays to get work for your organization to learn how to do this better, to build in processes to do this better, and to have an approach. That looks beyond just the numbers, but also at these other issues, because I think they affect the numbers in the end.
Yeah. Well, what I took from it was a disconnect between senior management thinking and everybody else's thinking. That senior management looked at short-term gains, instant gratification, and everybody else, and by that I mean those people leaving, the marketing people, the other people, the support functions, they were looking at the long game. They were looking at the sustainability and the getting things in place, so they understood where they were in the world and how they could service these new people. And then if they're being bombarded with new people all the time and just expected to get on with it, then their world clashes with the business objectives of senior management. So somewhere along the lines, I think no one has really talked to each other a lot.
Yeah, I think that's a good takeaway. And I guess the other takeaway for me, I don't think it's quite the elephant in the room. Maybe it's a little bit smaller than an elephant, but I think I'll speak it out loud, because I think there's also something in the room where it's, well, if I lose some marketing people, those people are more fungible. I could just hire more marketing people, and I want to get this superstar that has this big book of business, because that's going to be more important. And if there's some fallout around the margins, that's okay. And I just think, so I'll say that out loud. But I think, my response to that is that, if the support people are unhappy and leaving, it means that you have a bigger problem. And I think if we're only looking at the net gains around a person when you're evaluating them, and you're blind to the net losses or the potential net losses based on their management style, based on the way they relate to other people, that if the person is a yeller and and raises stress and people leave because of that, I think the evidence of sort of support staff leaving is just evidence of, I think, of a larger problem. So I just wanted to say that, because I think there's a tendency to say, well, if we lose these marketing people, we'll hire more marketing people, but this person is less replaceable. But I don't think that's true.
I think, Mike, you and I have always wanted to say what other people won't say. and I think you're absolutely right. There is a distinction in many companies, not just in the legal profession, that certain folk in the business are more important than others, without understanding that the shining stars can't function without the back office people. And I heard a comment from the wonderful LinkedIn community that in their company, they talked about fee earners and fee burners. And it doesn't get much more derogative than that, does it? That, the fee earners cannot function properly and effectively without the so-called fee burners. And we all have a place and a function. And I think it should be recognized that there are other people in law firms and legal departments than just the legal brains, and that they are actually as important to make the whole thing work. So what are we going to do about it, Mike? We usually suggest some kind of solution.
Yeah, I mean, I think this, to me, goes along with my aspirational hope for the legal community, which is not to ignore the billable hour, not to ignore the book of business, but to at the same time move to a wider, broader, set of things that we value people on and train people on. I think to me, that's one constructive solution. There's lots of people that do change management and talk about how to do this. And there's a lot of focus in the world on how do we hire and how do we find people that are the right cultural match and how do we assemble teams. I don't see a lot of that in law firms. I see that in the business world in general. So I don't think it's an area where there's not solutions out there. I think we just need to be willing to sort of take those steps and to see the value in that.
I would like to second that. It is about communicating, about seeing the value in everybody, and understand that the whole thing, the sum, is actually bigger than the individuals in it. That when you communicate properly, when you recognize each person's contribution towards the overall goal, then it will work. But if you just focus on certain key players and ignore the rest, well, the rest will walk out the door, and then the key players have nowhere to go.
Yeah. And I guess, my final comment to you, just because I think this might fall more in your bailiwick, but also the issue that we haven't talked about yet is how incredibly frustrating it must feel to be at a place, be part of the fabric of that place, be part of the culture, and then the ground shifts under your feet and all of a sudden it's different. And how do you deal with that? I'm sure that you get clients coming to you and saying, this has changed and now my boss is this type of person and I've given so much. And that must be very frustrating and difficult to deal with.
It is frustrating, it is difficult, and we can do an awful lot to alleviate that by starting the onboarding and offboarding process far sooner than we do. Instead of dumping somebody in without a parachute, then start warming everybody up to this new person coming, and maybe have different types of interviewing and recruitment. Let's leave it at that and see what other people think. It would be great to hear from everybody out there, and we shall be back with another hot topic. Take care. Thank you for now.
Bye-bye.